Unlike Square Enix, Falcom, despite being extremely historically important in the genesis of Japanese video games, never became a household name. However, with the advent of Steam, Falcom's games are now widely accessible and known. There is, however, one translated Falcom franchise that is rarely talked about even by the Falcom fanbase. In fact, most people would only know about it because of two things: a port for the SNES of its first entry that was localized and released in North America, and a PSP game that was digital only, a remake of this same first entry. Brandish. It's not surprising that this series is obscure. Like many Falcom games, it started on a Japan-exclusive computer, the PC-98. And of the 5 games released, only 2 ever were released in North America. And one of those releases was a PSP digital-only thing in 2015. 1 year after the PSP was discontinued. In this video, we'll take a look at the original Brandish as it was known to the West in 1995. Why does the 1995 SNES Brandish game stay ignored? You start the game. Right there, this happens. What the fuck is going on? How do I move? Why is the screen movement so sudden? Am I teleporting around? Am I turning around? Yes, you are. This is a dungeon exploring game all about turning around. Turning around in the choppiest way known to mankind. Well, let's remember that this game, in its original form, released for the PC-98 in 1991. This may seem completely absurd today to do something like this, but at the time it was certainly an interesting innovation. 3D wasn't around. And it's not like there was a way to do this transition smoothly with the rotation at the time. So, you rotate, as you can see. This is probably the biggest hurdle to overcome for any new player. It wouldn't be surprising to see most people trying to play this for 5 minutes and give up immediately. I'm sure as a viewer right now, you might not be able to comprehend how someone can get used to this, but eventually you just do. Up to a certain point, you don't get disoriented. The clunkiness doesn't stop at this rotating thing, however. First of all, I'll say the same thing as any other living reviewer of this game. Go to the controls and switch from lateral to rotate. Now, left and right don't turn you around, they strafe you around. You must hold down L or R, then press left and right to rotate, instead of the opposite. Why was this not the default? We have to remember that strafing was taboo and illegal almost worldwide until the 2000s. Once you make the controls easier on yourself, you'll realize that, on the whole, Brandish has a very bizarre interface. It takes some getting used to, and even as someone who finished the game for a second time now, I still was confused sometimes. It's difficult to describe, but you'll get it if you even try to play. One example of the bizarre interface logic is that you cannot move your items around and pile potions together until you get a dimensional box, which is a supplementary container that gives you more inventory space. Then, to move items around inside your inventory, you must first select the dimensional box, then click on the items, then back out of the box, then back out of your inventory. And if you want to move items between different dimensional boxes, God help you, my friend. Even the way you move around and do actions is unlike any game I've played. Attacking and casting spells is in real time, meaning you can mostly spam all you have without problems. However, for some reason, moving around is actually more like a grid-locked, turn-based thing. It's almost impossible to describe to someone who never played, but basically, this is not like an action game like a 2D Zelda, where you can move around in a direction and your momentum is carried around. You move on a specific grid, and you can't really do a new move until your current grid move is completed. This was most likely noticed since Brandish 2 on the Super Famicom did not have that problem at all. This movement problem is very apparent when you change your speed. The game gives you 3 speed options. The slowest option is reserved for tough encounters and bosses. It's necessary because this slow speed is pretty much the only one that makes you realize the timing of the grid movement. The normal speed is what you would use while getting used to everything. The high speed is what I would recommend once you know how to time and work your actions. It's pretty nice for a game such as this to give you the option to change your speed, and it mitigates the control problems I just mentioned. When you have to go through tough obstacles or plan your movements carefully, you can. Aside from that, Brandish is a pretty typical action RPG, but puts emphasis on rotating. Rotation is necessary to find switches, abnormal walls, fight enemies, and avoid traps. The whole game is constructed around this kind of careful exploration. You'll get keys, sledgehammers to break down walls, swords with limited durability, potions, etc. The standard fare of the genre. One neat feature that is present is the autosave. Each time you go to a new floor, whether voluntarily or not, the game will save. So if you forget to save, you'll at least have something. It's nice to see a console game from the 90s do such a thing. You can also, of course, manually save at any point in time. One thing I'll give to Brandish is that the people working on it really cared, which is not something you can say about all older games of its kind. Falcom took the time to create a strangely unique story as a background to the adventure, and every single shopkeeper is different and has different lines of dialogue. Even though you only see each of them mostly once and very briefly, the game even has nice illustrations for events that are very minor. So the general presentation, lore-wise and immersion-wise, is very good. Here's the flaw, it doesn't matter. The main story, if we can call it that, is barely present. It's mostly about solitary exploration and nothing else. You'd think that there would be something special happening, for example, when you get to the final boss. There's some kind of dialogue or scene, but no. None of the bosses have dialogue, motivation, or presentation, with maybe one exception. You goddamn fucking bitch. Otherwise, you can get into a fight with a ninja.
You're that ninja.
Why do you fight a ninja? What is he doing here? Nobody cares. The intro sequence before the title screen gives you lore that is barely referenced in the future. In fact, the only plotline that evolves, if we can qualify it as such, is the conflict between Alexis and Varric, named Della and Ares outside of the SNES translation. Basically, you, Varric, destroyed Alexis' master. I guess destroy is Nintendo of America's language for kill. That or the story is completely different from what I thought. And because Alexis is stupid, both of you fall in a hole and get into a dungeon, which you try to escape. Alexis then proceeds to act like a cross between a tsundere and Wile E. Coyote.
Beep, beep.
But that's the main interaction that actually takes place. The background story is barely addressed. What is happening in the dungeon? I hope you saw the intro. Who are you exactly? Who is Alexis' master actually? No time to explain. You're not playing this for the plot. Neon Falcom is known to have great music in most of their games. The original soundtrack of Brandish does not disappoint, if you listen to the 8-bit original soundtrack. The thing is that the arrangement that was made for the SNES is not that good. Here's an example. The SNES is capable of more than this. The music is not bad by any mean. The biggest problem is how much the music is repeated for the quality it has. Though Brandish has a tremendous amount of tracks, you'll hear mostly the main theme of each zones. And since they are not all great and zones are somehow long, you'll get tired of it. Now let's talk about why this game is very hard to get into. When you begin the game in the first zone, you'll have to get used to how the turning is, which is already a problem. But that's not all. The first zone of the game, the ruins, is probably the most filtering zone of the game, in that it will make most people drop it. Visually, the ruins is the most unimpressive place Brandish has to offer. Musically, the main theme of the ruins is one of the weakest arrangements. If you think it sounds fine, think about listening to this for an hour. Mechanically, the first zone is also the most boring and mundane. It requires you to use a bunch of keys and sledgehammers to progress, which means a lot of manipulations in the clunky inventory. Now, in terms of game design, we could consider this move to be the correct one. The first zone acts as a tutorial. It's not going to throw everything at you immediately, and it will certainly force you to learn the mechanics of the game. But this zone is 10 floors long. We are talking of hours. Which leads me to a design flaw this game seems to have, wasting the player's time. The design of a lot of the game, especially the first zone, is almost random at times. There are plenty of rooms that have just nothing in it, corridors that are long for no reason, times where you realized you had to go in a certain direction first and then have to retrace your steps, and most of the loot is uninteresting eventually. However, you still have to get all the loot just in case a key is present. One thing I will give the game is that, unlike many older games, Brandish is well designed enough to not force you into an unwinnable situation. It's basically impossible to fuck yourself over. Even if all your swords break, you can punch your way to victory. More on that later. You are given enough keys and sledgehammers to get things done. You can't get into a unwinnable situation in regards to leveling up either. You would need to play badly, intentionally, to break the game. Anyway, the first zone is a filter. It gives you the worst the game has to offer, and it gives that to you for a long time. Boss encounters are not really imaginative outside of the final boss, but the bosses of the first zone are also particularly uninspired. So I'm not surprised that most people stop there. The sad part is that from the second zone onward, everything gets exponentially better. Music, encounters, visuals, and mechanics are all superior. The game revolves less around item using on walls and doors, and more about navigating a dungeon carefully while paying attention. You have to look around for hidden pits and spike traps that will kill you easily, much more from the second zone onward. So is the first zone an outlier in terms of bad gameplay? No. Brandish was a game made at a time where it was required by law to make a bullshit and annoying section that nobody wants to do. The Dark Zone is there to fuck with players, plain and simple. Not only will you not see anything clearly there, and you'll need to constantly open your map to see holes marked around, because, again, you can't see them. Oh yeah, you need to press start to see your map every time. Also, enemies can only be hurt using fire magic, making you rely on your limited MP with slow recharge time, or a dark sword, which is not easy to come by. Not only that, but you need the dark armor and dark shield, otherwise you will not see the monsters in this zone. These pieces of equipment are in the tower zone and the cave zone. If you missed them and you don't have the warp magic, I don't know what to tell you. You have to walk all the way back. By the way, friendly tip, get the warp magic as soon as possible. The only good thing to say about the Dark Zone is that at least this is only 2 floors long. Brandish is an RPG at its core. Though leveling up will make you gain HP, there's actually a pretty neat system for your other stats. Your strength, magic power, and magic resistance all level up based on your actions in the game. Making physical attacks levels up your arm strength. Casting offensive spells levels up your knowledge. And taking magical damage increases your magical resistance. Now, there is a problem with systems like these. People will try to exploit it. Everyone who played Oblivion picked athletics and acrobatics and leveled up by walking around and jumping.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
Don't lie, we all did it. Well, in Brandish, the exploit equivalent is at least a bit harder to get for a newcomer, and even if discovered, it only gives you a slight edge. So, for some godforsaken reason, your arm strength, goes up exponentially faster when you attack with no sword. Basically, all those swords you have with durability, sell them, nobody cares. In the early game, attack enemies bare-handed, you'll get stronger faster, and most monsters are pushovers at this point. Keep a single good sword for boss encounters and you're golden. The only thing, at least, is that just like all the other stats that evolve upon use, there is a cap at 99.99, so you'll never truly break the game. Where the truly absurd part arrives is probably how magic resistance is calculated. You will never be able to completely mitigate physical damage unless you block with your shield or cast a barrier spell. This makes physical attacks a constant threat. Your resistance is only given by equipment. Magical resistance, however, is not linked to equipment, which makes it easier to mitigate in theory by simply taking magical damage on purpose. However, the game devs realized that allowing you to infinitely level up your magic resistance in the very beginning was a bad idea. So, how it works is, for each point of damage, you gain only 0.01 magic resistance. So, at a point, grinding magic resistance too early is time-consuming because all enemies in an area will end up doing a single point of damage if your resistance is too high. Unless you sleep. Sleeping in the game is used to recuperate your health and mana. You'll do this all the time during the game. However, if enemies attack you while you sleep, they do extra damage. And it seems the devs didn't think about the unintended consequence this had. Now, I don't really understand how the damage formula works, but in short, you can sleep in front of an enemy and get very high damage regardless of your current magic resistance. So you'll get, for example, 12 damage instead of 1, or even 56, which allows you to max it out quite quickly and easily, way over the actual limit taught by the devs. This will make the game way easier, but not trivial, since even with maximum MR, the final boss can still damage you magically. And magic-based attack from enemies are not the most common. Physical attacks are the usual thing. Still, this is an oversight that has the ability to completely eliminate many threats in the game, like the penultimate boss. But every old game has its exploits. I think that Brandish, in spite of that, has good enough design to prevent abuse. Arm strength and knowledge gain, for example, scales with the monster's level that you attack, preventing you from endless grinding, unless you have a lot of time. Magic resistance is the only stat that is truly exploitable. Outside of this, you can yourself cast magic. You'll get rings to cast spells a certain number of times, and scrolls bought in shops to endlessly cast them. Magic can be extremely powerful, but mostly balanced. Warp allows you to skip certain puzzles in specific circumstances, but costs all your mana and is also very cost prohibitive in shops. Heal costs little MP and heals a lot, but the healing speed is rather slow. Fireball is the first spell you'll get as a scroll, most likely, and destroys everything as you level up your knowledge by simply using it. However, as the game goes on, more and more enemies are immune to offensive spells, and in the last zone, offensive spells are basically useless. So, all in all, we have an exploring game with decently designed and balanced mechanics, decent music, and yeah, pretty much decent everything. It's not bad or anything, it can be pretty fun once you get used to it. And by it, I mean the rotation. It's the elephant in the room, no way around it. Still, rotation is not inserted randomly, but very purposefully. Feel confused by turning around? Well, there are points in the game where this thing is used voluntarily. There are rooms that teleport you around or turn you around without giving you a hint that it happened, in order to confuse you. And it's extremely effective at it. I don't believe I played a 2D game that was so effective at spatially confusing the player on purpose. This makes the labyrinth more formidable and some encounters more stressful. Brandish is very much puzzle-oriented, thinking-oriented, compared to most dungeon crawlers. And the puzzles are neither complete bullshit or so easy they make you feel like you are wasting your time. Whether you have to navigate in the dark while avoiding enemies, or if you have to solve a riddle or navigate teleporters, Brandish truly does more than other games of its kind, and utilize the turning mechanic in all of them. This whole rotation adds another dimension, literally and figuratively, so that Brandish can do things like no other. At a time where 3D wasn't really so much of a thing, and where 2D was very limited, it was good. Ultimately, that's the problem with the original port of Brandish. No matter how well harmonized everything is, rotating a screen in 2D space in 1995 with a not-so-stellar execution at the dawn of 3D gaming, it wasn't the best choice. It was too late when it came out on the SNES and could not stand the test of time. But isn't Brandish unique, at least for the SNES? Am I being too harsh with it? Well, I would be on two conditions. One, there are no other similar and better games for the SNES. And two, there are no other way to play this unique experience. Both of these statements are false. We are not in a situation like Landstalker for the Sega Genesis, where you cannot really find a similar experience on the console, because the SNES has Brandish 2. Well, the Super Famicom had Brandish 2, but a fan localized it since its initial release. Brandish 2 has everything the original had and more. More weapons, enemies, better music, better story, better interface, better movement, more variety in dungeons, villages, etc. It's without question the better game. And as I said in the beginning of the video, the remake of the first Brandish is also available in English for the PSP. Brandish Dark Revenant is basically, with little exceptions, the first Brandish game as you would play it on the SNES, except the screen turns smoothly, which, you know, in a game all about a rotating screen, is a decent thing to have. In the end, there is very little reason for the common man to go back to the original Brandish on the SNES. And thus, that is why I call it an example of archaic innovation. It's certainly a brilliant and unique idea, but not all ideas hold up to the test of time. Thank you for watching this video. With that, I believe I'm done.